Hello there. I want to share with you a story that might teach you something, just as it taught me. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary day at work. Ordinary, until it wasn't. They looked me straight in the eyes and said the words I'll never forget. "We don't need old men like you slowing us down." No handshake, no thank you. Just arrogance wrapped in a dismissal. My name is Stanley Rowe. I am 59 years old, and for nearly 2 decades I worked as the operations manager at Harper Machinery in Indianapolis. 18 years of dedication. I was never the man who craved attention, never the one to raise his voice at meetings or make grand speeches. I was the steady hand, the quiet force that kept the gears turning in a company that supplied equipment to half the factories in the Midwest. When Vanessa Harper, daughter of the founder, Charles Harper, said those words to me, I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't even raise my voice. I just nodded once, turned, and walked back to my office. There, I started to pack. No shouting, no scene. Only silence. The silence of a man putting nearly 20 years of his life into a cardboard box. As I placed my framed photos, my old coffee mug, and the small tools of habit into that box, I noticed the younger employees watching me. They quickly looked away, pretending to stay busy. Some of them I had hired myself, boys and girls who once walked in fresh out of school, now grown men and women with families of their own. I had trained them, guided them, supported them, and now, not one of them spoke a word. Charles Harper, Vanessa's father, had built this company with his own 2 hands. He started in a garage with a single lathe. Through grit and determination, he grew it into a $30 million business. When his health began to fail, he chose me personally to run operations. I can still hear his words. "You're the only one I trust not to cut corners." But Charles wasn't there anymore. His daughter was. Just 28 years old, armed with a business degree and 2 glossy years of living in Miami. To her, modernization meant cutting ties with anyone who remembered the old ways, anyone who valued people more than spreadsheets. As I carried that box to my truck, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad. Strangely, I felt calm. Because Vanessa hadn't read the fine print. She didn't know about the clause in my contract. The clause Charles himself had insisted on years ago. It guaranteed me 2 full years of salary if I were ever terminated without cause. I placed the box gently on the passenger seat of my truck and sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the factory floor. The machines I had kept running with my own 2 hands. The systems I had created. The people I had hired. All of it about to collapse under her so-called fresh vision. She thought firing me was the end. But she didn't know. It was only the beginning. The very next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with papers spread out before me. My employment contract, highlighted in yellow by my old friend and attorney, Harold Preston. Harold had been practicing law for decades. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the type to overpromise. He loved a clean fight, and this one, he said, was as clear as they come. He pointed to the clause. "It's airtight, Stanley. Termination without documented cause. That means they owe you 2 full years' salary. They can argue, but they'll lose. And when they lose, they'll cover my fees too." I believed him. Harold was not just a lawyer, he was someone who relished moments like this. But even as he spoke, my thoughts drifted elsewhere. To Charles Harper. Charles had been more than a boss to me. In many ways, he was the father I never really had. My own father had left when I was 11, disappearing into the night, leaving my mother to raise 3 boys on a secretary's salary. I carried that abandonment with me all my life. Charles, on the other hand, had taken a chance on me much later. I was in my 40s then, laid off from a dying automotive plant, holding nothing more than a community college degree and years of hands-on experience. He looked at me across his desk and said words I will never forget. "Credentials don't build machines, Stanley. Men with sense and skill do." 2 years later, he promoted me to operations manager. And when my wife Linda was diagnosed with cancer, it was Charles who quietly rearranged my schedule so I could take her to every single treatment. He never made speeches about family values. He lived them. That was the kind of man he was. That was why watching his daughter dismantle everything he built cut me so deeply. My phone rang. The screen lit up with his name. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But 18 years of loyalty doesn't disappear overnight. "Stanley." Charles's voice was heavy, tired. "What the hell happened yesterday?" "Ask your daughter," I said, my tone calm, not angry, just final. He sighed. "She told me you were resistant to change, that you were undermining her authority with the team." I didn't respond. I let the silence speak for me. Charles knew me better than that. Finally, his voice came again. "You're filing, aren't you?" "Already have. Harold is handling it." There was a pause, then a weary exhale. I warned her. I told her to look at the contracts. Told her before I stepped down that protections were in place. But she said she needed to clean house. You, Thomas, Jennifer, anyone over 50. My jaw tightened. Thomas had been our head of engineering for 12 years. Jennifer had run the quality control lab like it was her personal kingdom. Both irreplaceable. Both tossed aside like yesterday's scrap. "Is that what you wanted, Charles?" I asked quietly, though my voice carried a sharp edge. "To throw out the very people who built this company with you?" "You know it's not," he whispered back. "But I gave her control. It's hers now." In the background, I heard Vanessa's voice. Sharp, commanding, barking orders at someone. A voice that carried no respect, only authority for the sake of it. Charles hurried off the call. I set the phone down and looked again at the yellow highlighted clause. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about something far deeper. Respect. Dignity. The years of loyalty and knowledge being tossed aside like they meant nothing. I picked up my phone once more. I called Thomas. I called Jennifer. I called every veteran who had been fired that same day. Some were furious. Some were shaken. All of them were uncertain about what would come next. "Take a breath," I told each of them. "Check your contracts. Call Harold." By noon, we weren't just discarded employees anymore. We were something else. We were an army gathering in the shadows. 3 days after I was fired, I found myself in a glass-walled conference room downtown. The kind of room where decisions get made quietly, but their impact echoes for years. On one side of the table sat Harold and me. His old leather briefcase was open, my contract laid neatly in front of us. On the other side, Vanessa. Perfect hair, expensive suit, arms crossed like a queen on her throne. Beside her sat a young attorney who looked barely out of law school, nervous, shifting in his chair. Vanessa didn't even look at me when she spoke. "This is ridiculous. We're moving in a new direction. That's cause enough." Harold didn't flinch. He tapped the highlighted clause with one finger. "Termination without cause, as defined in Appendix C, requires severance equal to 24 months' salary. That's approximately $320,000. The young lawyer's eyes flicked to the contract. His face paled as he scanned the lines, realizing what it meant. Vanessa cut him off sharply. He was resistant to change. That's insubordination. Harold leaned forward, his tone calm, almost patient. "Where's the documentation? Written warnings? Performance reviews. A record of repeated behavior. Because Appendix C requires all of that. One claim isn't enough. The lawyer flipped through a folder, thin as paper. Empty. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Fine, we'll pay him a few months' severance and be done with it. Harold closed his briefcase with a snap. 24 months, as stipulated. Her voice rose. That's outrageous. 6 months. Take it or leave it. I stayed silent, just watching her. And in that silence I saw her father's stubbornness in her face, but twisted. Charles's stubbornness had always been about building something. Hers was about control. Harold stood. Then we'll see you in court. Discovery should be very interesting, especially regarding the sudden termination of multiple employees over 50. The young lawyer's eyes widened. He leaned toward Vanessa, whispering something urgent. She brushed him off like he was nothing. Then she turned to me, eyes sharp. You'll be tied up in court for years, old man, and good luck finding another job at your age. That was the moment the door opened, and there he was, Charles Harper, pale, thinner than I remembered, leaning on the doorframe. But his eyes were as sharp as ever. For a moment no one spoke. Then his voice, low but steady. Vanessa, a word. Now. She stiffened. Dad, we're in the middle of now. His tone left no room for debate. Through the glass I watched them argue. Charles's hands moving emphatically, Vanessa's face turning red with anger, her body stiff and defensive. When they returned, Vanessa wouldn't even look at me. Charles turned to her lawyer. Prepare the severance agreement, exactly as written. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She leaned close as I gathered my things and hissed, "This isn't over." I only nodded, because she was right. It wasn't over. A week later, the money hit my account, $320,000. I stared at the bank statement longer than I should have. That kind of money should have made me feel triumphant, victorious, like I had won. But instead, I felt hollow, because it had never been about money. It was about 18 years of loyalty, about sweat and long nights, about trust and respect, things you can't buy back with a wire transfer. That afternoon, I drove out to a quiet little diner off the highway. The kind of place where the coffee tastes burnt, the pie is yesterday's, and no one asks questions. Waiting for me there was Thomas, our former head of engineering. He stirred his coffee without looking at me. His eyes were tired. Harold got me a year's severance, he said finally. Not bad, but they want me to sign an NDA. 5 years of silence about my own work. He gave a bitter laugh. 40 years in engineering, Stanley. And suddenly I'm not even allowed to talk about the machines I built with my own hands. I reached into my pocket and slid a business card across the table. Douglas Clenny, Precision Parts. He's been after me for years. He's looking for a consultant. No NDA required. Thomas frowned, turning the card over in his fingers. If Harper finds out, they'll sue me. I shook my head. Not if you're just advising on industry standards. Nothing proprietary about that. He tucked the card into his pocket slowly, still unsure. What's going on, Stanley? You're not the type to stir the pot. I leaned closer, lowered my voice. I'm not stirring the pot. I'm building something new. Douglas wants me to head up a new division, specialized hydraulics. The work Vanessa killed because she thought it wasn't worth it. Thomas leaned back, eyes widening. The custom jobs? That was Harper's future. Charles always said it. And she's cutting it for mass production? Exactly. Thomas rubbed a hand over his face. She thinks she can compete with overseas manufacturers on price. She can't. Not with our costs. I know, I said. And so does Charles. But his hands are tied now. We sat in silence for a long time, the sound of the diner's ceiling fan ticking overhead. Both of us knew what this meant. Not just for us, but for the 100+ families still working under Vanessa's leadership. Families who trusted us once to keep the lights on. Finally, Thomas looked up. "So, what are you going to do?" I met his eyes. "Build something better. Something that respects the past but embraces the future." For the first time since I'd been fired, Thomas smiled. Small, but real. "And I suppose you'll need an engineer who knows hydraulics." I smiled back. "The job is yours, if you want it." 2 months later, I stood inside a converted warehouse on the east side of Indianapolis. The air smelled of sawdust, steel, and fresh paint. The echoes of drills and hammers filled the space. This was going to be the home of Cornerstone Precision, our new company. The name was Thomas's idea. "Because you build from the corners up," he told me. "That's how you make something that lasts." At a desk cluttered with contracts and blueprints sat Douglas Clenny, the man bankrolling the operation. He was a broad-shouldered man with a white beard, sleeves always rolled up. The kind of man who looked like he'd been born in a workshop. He was nearing retirement, but he had the energy of someone who still had plenty to prove. He looked up from the paperwork. "Machine shops are confirmed. CNC programmer starts Monday. And Jason Wright, you remember him? He's agreed to join us." I nodded slowly. Jason had been one of Harper's most talented engineers. Brilliant with computer modeling, criminally underpaid. Vanessa had slashed his department's budget by 30% while doubling her own salary. He quit 2 weeks later. Douglas whistled low. "That makes 7 people from Harper now. All top performers. Vanessa's bleeding talent." I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. "People follow leadership they can trust," I said quietly. "And Vanessa doesn't inspire trust." My phone buzzed. A message from Jennifer. She was still stuck at Harper, too close to retirement to walk away. But she had eyes and ears inside. The message was a photo of an internal memo. Production delays. Quality issues. 3 major clients threatening to pull contracts. I handed the phone to Douglas. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the memo with a frown. Just as we predicted, the brain drain's hitting them already. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't. Harper wasn't just a company. It was people. People with mortgages, kids in college, elderly parents to care for. Their pain wasn't what I wanted. "We should reach out to Midwest Manufacturing," I said. "One of Harper's biggest clients. Let them know we'll be operational in 60 days. Douglas gave me a nod, scribbling a note. "Already done." They're eager to talk. I walked to the wide window overlooking the warehouse floor. Workers were welding, sparks lighting up the space like fireflies. The skeleton of something new was taking shape. Something built on respect, not arrogance. And then my phone rang again. The name on the screen stopped me cold. Charles Harper. I hesitated, then answered. "Stanley." His voice was thin, weary. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." A pause, then, "I know what you're doing. The new company. The people you're hiring away. I'm not calling to stop you. I'm calling to ask for your help." That caught me off guard. "Help? After all this?" "Vanessa's selling off assets, cutting corners. The board is worried. I'm worried. I should have listened to you when you warned me." He took a shaky breath. "Come to my house tonight, 7 o'clock. Bring Thomas if you can. The board wants to discuss a change in leadership." I looked out over the warehouse floor, the hum of progress below me, our future, my future. But my past was calling me back. "I'll be there," I said finally, "but I'm not promising anything." 6 months after I carried that cardboard box out of Harper Machinery, I found myself walking back into its main conference room. It was the quarterly all-hands meeting. The oak table stretched the length of the room, polished until it gleamed under the overhead lights. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table stood Vanessa, immaculate suit, perfectly styled hair. Her new executive team sat close by, most of them under 35. They shuffled papers nervously, avoiding my eyes. The smell of expensive perfume clashed with the stale tension in the room. I wasn't supposed to speak until the end. That was the deal the board made with me. Let Vanessa give her presentation first. Let her explain the 37% drop in revenue, the lost contracts, the quality failures. She was halfway through her polished slides when she noticed me at the back of the room. Her face drained of color. "What is he doing here?" she snapped, pointing directly at me. Silence fell. All eyes shifted to the board members. Charles sat quietly among them, Kane leaning against his chair. He gave a small nod to the chairman. The chairman rose slowly. His voice was calm, measured. "Vanessa, the board has reached a decision regarding the company's leadership." Her voice cracked with panic. "You can't be serious. This is my company." The chairman turned toward me. "Mr. Rowe, would you care to explain the new arrangement?" I stood, a folder in my hand. It looked eerily like the one Harold had once carried when he fought for my severance. Only this time, the contents were very different. My voice was steady. "Harper Machinery is merging with Cornerstone Precision. The board approved the acquisition agreement this morning." Vanessa let out a sharp laugh, the kind that echoed off the walls. "This is absurd. I'm the majority shareholder." For the first time in months, Charles pushed himself to his feet. His cane shook in his hand, but his voice was firm. "No, Vanessa. You hold 20%. I retained 51. And today, I cast my vote in favor of the merger." I slid the folder across the table to her. "Cornerstone will absorb Harper's custom hydraulics division. The rest will continue under new leadership." Right then, the door opened. Thomas stepped inside, his presence filling the room. "My leadership," he said, voice strong. Vanessa's hands shook as she flipped through the papers. Her lips trembled, but no words came. I looked at her, my voice quiet but final. "This is business, Vanessa. Nothing personal." The silence was suffocating. Vanessa's face was pale, her fingers gripping the folder as if it might save her. But it was done. The company that had cast me aside was now in my hands. A year after the merger, I stood on the observation platform of our expanded facility. Below me, the factory floor was alive. The hum of machines, the steady rhythm of tools, the movement of workers who knew exactly what they were doing. It was the sound of something rebuilt, not from scratch, but from experience, loyalty, and respect. Beside me stood Charles Harper. His health had faded, his cane steadying him, but there was a light in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. He handed me a report, his hand trembling slightly. "Quarterly numbers," he said with a faint smile. "Best in 5 years." I scanned the pages. Margins were up. Employee retention stabilized. 3 new patents filed. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. I looked down again at the floor. Jason was training 2 new programmers on the latest systems. Jennifer, still in her lab coat, was inspecting components with her familiar sharp eye. Thomas sketched a design by hand before transferring it to CAD. just like he always did. Experience and innovation. Not at war with each other. Not one replacing the other. Working side by side. Building something stronger together. Charles's voice broke the silence. Vanessa called yesterday, from Miami. I raised an eyebrow. He gave a dry chuckle. She's starting a consulting firm. Asked if I'd invest. And will you? I asked. He shook his head slowly. I told her to come back here first, to learn the business from the ground up, the way I did, the way you did. She hung up. But this morning... His voice trailed off for a moment. She called again. Asked if the offer still stood. We both stood there in silence, watching the company's future being shaped in real time. Finally, Charles spoke again. His voice was soft, but it carried weight. When I wrote that severance clause into your contract, Stanley, I never imagined it would lead to this. I smiled faintly. Neither did I. We didn't need to say more. We stood shoulder to shoulder, two men watching not just machines, but legacies. Harper Custom Hydraulics and Cornerstone Precision, no longer rivals. No longer past and future, but one. And in that moment, I realized something. Sometimes life doesn't end where others think it ends. Sometimes being cast out isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the beginning of building something that truly lasts.